the Illinois Forestry Association is going to focus on wildlife management. And so without further ado, I know that you guys can hear me, and I would like to introduce Raymond Berry. He's the executive director at the Shawnee Resource Conservation and Development Area. And Ray's got a great presentation, as well as Isabella. Isabella is joining us as the Illinois Oak Ecosystem Forester. She's in the American Bird Conservatory, and she will be going after Ray. So thank you very much. Please feel free to send me a chat if you've got something, a question, or you can't hear anything. Let us know right away, and we'll make sure that we get it all straightened out. Ray, are you ready? All right, great. Thank you so much. We look forward to a great presentation.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Let's go. All right. So thanks so much, Trisha and Kinsey. Good morning, everyone. Very grateful to be here presenting on our Forestry for the Birds efforts. So yeah, I work for the Shawnee RC&D for short, and been with the organization since 2022. I was finishing out my master's degree at the time in forestry. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in forestry from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. I was lucky enough to share some of my classes with Isabella as well. So really cool to see her again and be doing a webinar like this. So my background, obviously forestry, but my master's really focused in on the human dimensions of forestry. So the interface between sociology and forestry, what are those social relationships that affect forestry? So that's where my interest lies, and um, I really enjoy ecology in general. And so that's kind of where our Forestry for the Birds work rests, is like our ecological interest within the organization. Just to give a little background on the Shawnee RC&D, we are a nonprofit conservation-based organization that there was a huge network of RC&Ds across the nation that were under the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And they were all defunded at a period of time and had to either go independent, or many of them went under, and were some of the remaining last surviving, if you will, RC&Ds that exist. There's, let's see here, there's five, I believe, in Illinois still operating. So yeah, we do a lot of on the ground management, conservation based work. We engage in lots of partnerships. And pretty much any land management organization, agency, department that's operating in Illinois, especially in the southern region, we try to collaborate with them and partner wherever we can. Just as a nonprofit, that's a great way to sustain the organization, and then in general, just to, really increase efficiency all around. So I'll go ahead and start diving into our bird-focused projects and efforts. We've been at Forestry for the Birds. We've been engaged in that work for quite some time, but really wanted to start talking about it with the Illinois Forestry for the Birds Pocket Guide, since this is a really great way to get started into Forestry for the Birds work. So similar pocket guides have been created for other states, including Indiana. I believe Vermont has one. But really popular, Forestry for the Birds is growing in popularity, and it's a very powerful thing. Birds are charismatic, and they're great ecological indicators, right? That's why we're really interested in them as an organization. We're looking at the behavior, the use of different habitat types by these birds, often in response to our management activities. So this pocket guide covers 12 bird species that nest in the central hardwoods. They're relatively easy to identify by sight and sound, and they're species most in need of conservation. You can see all of them there in the top left picture here. Our authors, Dr. Mike Baltz was the former coordinator of Let the Sunshine In, Illinois. If you've heard of that organization, that's where this pocket guide originated, was from that program, the Let the Sunshine In program. We've got Dr. Kyle Brazel, who is the coordinator for the Central Hardwoods joint venture. Alan Purcell is the director of the Sam Shines Foundation in Indiana. And Dr. Jessica Alcalt was with Purdue University. So they all came together to create this pocket guide with the help of the Indiana pocket guide, as that one was developed already. So using that one as a model, we created one here. And so in the bottom right picture, you can see one of the species examples being the red-headed woodpecker. We've got information on migratory status, population trends, and conservation concerns. And then I'll go ahead and flip here. The next page here, the picture shows we continues with habitat preferences, the nesting behavior, as well as foraging and diet. And then where we diverged from the Indiana Pocket Guide here, we offer some forest management guidance, which I want to caution everyone whenever it comes to the forest management guidance. You always need to talk to a forester or a related entity before enacting any prescriptions or activities within your forest. These are guidelines, and they need to be matched to the site that you have. Very important. You know, there's timber harvesting mentioned in here, and I would just say again, like if I would change anything about this pocket guide, it would have right next to timber harvest, please consult your forester, whether that be with the state or just a private consulting forester. It's always good to talk to them whenever you're considering large changes in your forest or just entering into management in general. So our project goals for the development of this guide was obviously to develop and print the guide and spread it around to land managers, our partnering organizations, and the general public. And, really the biggest thing that we were looking to is to foster more public interest in forest management. That's what we focus on a lot as an organization. The Shawnee RC&D is trying to increase public awareness and interest in forest management, especially as it relates to oak ecosystem support. So yeah, the guide, it's been a huge success. It's very desired by many of our different partners, and it's really a great tool. We're glad to see it, so much public interest in it. Another forestry for the birds related project that we're involved in is a huge partnership project with the Shawnee National Forest here. And this is in the very early stages of development. It's called the Sky Blue Project, focusing on Cerulean Warbler habitat improvement. So, of course, this is also a dual forest health project. Um, any of the Forest Service projects, and nowadays they're focused on forest health, of course, but then achieving other objectives, in this case, habitat improvement. And so you can see all the partners that are involved in this project. It's quite the collaborative group. We've met twice so far within the past year and really have gotten on the ground to discuss, some of these topics, what the project can look like, what is desired by the group. And we're all coming together to collaboratively create a prescription for this area that's covered. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But of course, here you can see some nice pictures of a cerulean warbler there, and then the U.S. Forest Service biologist Mark Vukovic. He took this picture of a fledgling last season. I just thought that was nice. Actually, on the Shawnee. So To continue with this project, it focuses on the Cave Valley bird area of the Shawnee National Forest, and this is on the western side of the forest. If you're familiar with the area, kind of centers on the Pomona Natural Bridge um, region of the Shawnee. So you can see this map on the right here. You've got the Cave Valley bird areas outlined in blue. Those black polygons or blocks there, that's where common stand exams have been done. That's um, that's how the Forest Service assesses their forest stands. You know, they're looking at basal area, what's the composition like, what's the volume in that forest. And so they chose to focus on the K Valley bird area because it's the greatest concentration of singing males that they were able to find forest wide. Of the 100 detections, 80 of them were within this area. So obviously a very important area for the Cerulean warblers. And if any of you are familiar with cerulean warblers, they tend to like, old growth, mature forest, large canopy trees. Um, the Forest Service biologist constantly mention this concept of an ecotone, where you have like an upland forest that breaks out into like a creek valley, or riparian bottomlands. And there's a lot of those ecotones in this area. I mean, these are focused, or, they're focused on valleys, the Cave Valley area. There's a number, at least two large creeks that are flowing through this system of uplands and bottomland hardwoods. So, really great habitat and in general, but a great area to focus on if we're trying to improve conditions for cerulean warblers. So, of course, the Forest Service is also looking to increase forest health, and they're going to do so through commercial and non-commercial timber harvesting, mostly focusing on non-native pine plantations. They're working to convert all of these pine plantations to good hardwood oak hickory forest over time. And hopefully, in the process, like to be intentional with designing these practices to improve and expand habitat for cerulean warblers throughout the area. And so the Forest Service has conducted common stand exams to describe and understand the composition and conditions of these forested areas. And then we'd like to conduct a regime of non-native invasive species removal as well as prescribed fire across these landscapes, both federal, state, and private lands. So just a little bit more about the project. These two maps show confirmed cerulean warbler locations. Dotted line is showing the Cave Valley area as well as our project area in this case. On the right, you're getting to see some of the results from those stand exams. You can see there's a good amount of pine stands in the area. And our hope is that you see that the cerulean warbler locations are pretty close to that area. We'd like to improve the condition of this forest stand in converting the pines back to oak hickory forest. Hopefully, we'll get more cerulean warblers inhabiting that area over time. Of course, that is a very long-term goal, probably one that we may not even see, but we'd like to set it on the right trajectory to go that way. So where we fit into all this, of course, the U.S. Forest Service is the main project initiator and implementer, but we're there for project support as a partner, as well as we'll focus our private land work around these areas. So there are several landowners, private landowners that are directly adjacent to these project areas, especially around Pomona, which these maps focus on here. And so we'll basically just focus our activities on private lands around these areas whenever the project is active and hopefully gain greater efficiency and, a more beneficial impact on a larger scale, by working across on private lands while the Forest Service is engaged in public lands work here. And then one of our final efforts for our forestry for the birds work started in the Trail of Tears State Forest, and this is really where our forestry for the birds work began. So a demonstration area was established within Trail of Tears State Forest that would help, demonstrate to public and to other land managers what interventions like prescribed fire, selective harvest, non-native invasive species removal, and other forest stand improvement activities, what that looks like on the ground, as well as, creating a good area that we can study over time. So this demonstration area was established around 2016 through 2018, and a selective harvest was conducted in between that time in part of the area. So the harvest doesn't cover the whole area. If you can see in the map here on the page, there's different treatment areas. There are control areas, there's a burn first area and a cut first area. But really, what we're looking at is just the difference between these interventions now. Like, what are the forest conditions that follow? And as far as the our bird research is concerned, point count surveys were conducted during the breeding season, so we wanted to see how breeding birds were using these habitats after these interventions were made. So yeah, we're looking at the short-term avian response to prescribed fire, forest stand improvement, thinning, as well as selective harvest. Let's see here. Sorry, before I move on, just to say some of the point count surveys, overall, pretty positive response in the breeding birds. The majority of the birds that were counted, there were 30 bird species that were detected in these surveys. 11 of them responded positively, 8 responded negatively, and several had no, a neutral response. So overall, pretty good results, but this was just one round. And so we really need to conduct these surveys again. We need to continue them. But I do want to talk a little bit about where our monitoring work has gone to and what we're looking to build out of it. So this is an image that I created whenever I took over as the executive director and really established our monitoring protocols that are permanent and will continue as long as I can manage to keep them going. We establish permanent photo points that are paired with forest inventory plots as well as like an herbaceous understory survey. So we're looking at the plants in the understory, we're looking at the shrub layer as all the way up to the canopy. And these pictures, you can see they're taken in each cardinal direction and then a canopy shot on the right side of each row. The top row, the top 2 rows here are Trail of Tears State Forest. Top row is a managed area. This is within the selective harvest area, and it's been burned 3 times now, I believe. And then right below it is a control. So I'm hoping that, over time, as we continue to visit these photo plots, we'll see the change. I mean, already you can see an obvious difference between the managed area and the control area. We've got a lot of regeneration in the understory layer here. There's a lot of regenerating oaks within the managed area. And then in the unmanaged area here, we can see that, there's really not much regeneration. There are a lot of mid-story trees. However, they're shading out the understory quite a bit. And we're really trying to push forest in the direction of these, you know, high amounts of regeneration. The top or the bottom two rows here are from Dixon Springs State Park. The third row here is within, again, a managed stand. However, here there's only been forest stand improvement treatments. So the canopy has largely been untouched. However, you can still see there's some canopy spaces that are, able to fill in over time. And the differences in the regeneration between the managed and the unmanaged control plot are less noticeable here. These are in a different, area of the forest. Dixon Springs State Park being on the east, more, it's relatively centrally located, but closer to the southeastern portion of the state. So we see a lot more, very dry upland forest in this region, rocky, thin soils. So actually a lot better for oak regeneration, even when there's not management activities being conducted. That doesn't mean that there isn't work to be done here. There absolutely is. So that's where our monitoring has gone to here. And we're planning to continue these efforts. I'll continue to visit these and take data, get new photos, and use these as, a public education tool, and then hopefully to, generate funds to continue these monitoring efforts and management efforts in general. So here you can see a picture of the point setup. We'll drive, a piece of rebar, I apologize, into the ground, and then we measure out like a 12-foot radius plot, and then count all of the regenerating vegetation in there, the different species, what are their condition, what kind of invasives are present. And so all that data is collected. I'll take notes on the overstory as well. But really what we're looking at is developing very simple and low cost protocols for monitoring that is easy to maintain over time for different folks at different skill levels as well. It's very easy to take a picture and, if you're setting up these things right, it's the picture tells the story itself, really. So future additions to our monitoring, I'd like to add passive acoustic and ultrasonic recorders that'll capture, the bird calls as well as insects and even bats. That's kind of, like looking to the future in a dreaming way, but it's what we'd like to add in there. And to continue these bird count surveys as well. But we're looking at also adding in terrestrial LiDAR, which will give you a really good picture of the ground layer through the canopy. It's great for looking at fuel conditions. If we're looking, we also engage in a lot of wildfire and community wildfire protection work. So we're interested in how these management interventions affect fuel conditions as well. Some simple erosion monitoring we'd like to do is just drive some erosion pins and see what the response is after prescribed fire, timber stand improvement, and harvest when it does happen. But where we really shine with the Shawnee RC&D is our partnerships. So there are organizations out there that are doing wildlife monitoring. One that comes to mind, Dr. Peace at Southern Illinois University of Carbondale has the Sounds of Nature program, where he deploys these acoustic recorders And, they're just out there for a period of time, and then they come back to the lab for analysis, detect what all different kinds of species were detected. So we'd like to really partner with folks that are already doing that work. They have the analysis capabilities, and, there's greater efficiencies to be gained when we can partner with folks that are doing this kind of work. Same with U of I. U of I Extension is very active in the area and does all different types of programs like this. So there's a lot of potential for what we could do together in this area. And then finally, we'd really like to add in a citizen science component to this. So, like the Southern Illinois Audubon Society and other Audubon societies throughout the state, they do these bird surveys already, and some of them are active within like the Cave Valley bird area that I mentioned, and other areas that are close to where we conduct management. So, you know, hopefully we can partner and do more together in that way. I mean, with that, really, I will take any questions. Let's see. You doing all right on time here, Trisha?
Yeah, yes, we are, Ray. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions in the Q&A. Before I get going, I did want to apologize for not introducing Kinsey Macco. She is our Illinois Forestry Association coordinator, so she's joining me on this call to help monitor the background. So if you hear from Kinsey, she is our welcome addition to our team. With that, Ray, what a phenomenal presentation. I can't thank you enough. It is really inspiring to see what you're doing at the Shawnee. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece of property, and it is a wonderful forest in Illinois. And we're so glad to see the work that you're doing and the collaborative partnerships that you've developed. Let's walk through some of the questions right here. So Brenda asked, can you put a link for the pocket guide into the chat? I think many people want to figure out how they can obtain some copies of that resource.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I can do that. And so yeah. So I'm gonna have to stop sharing if
Sure.
that's all right.
The website is phenomenal. It really is.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Great. Thank you. Let's see. Add a file.
Kinsey might be typing it in.
Oh yeah, I guess we do host it as well.
While we're working on the link, you want to answer a question. Jen asked,
Yeah,
how can timber harvest improve old growth forest?
that is a great question. I would say, in this case, especially concerning old growth forest, um, timber harvest would have to be very nuanced and very carefully practiced to not degrade those conditions. But there is a way, of course, we're talking about like, I mean, selective tree harvest in the case of like old growth. So really identifying what tree species, in Illinois, our longest lived tree species, of course, is the white oak. And you really need to look at the composition of the forest. In Illinois, it's really we're looking at mature forest that might transition to old growth, but so much of our forests have been manipulated and disturbed over time that there is not very many old growth remnants that remain. And I do think it's very important, and I'm very glad to be working with the Shawnee in this capacity. They're very dedicated to managing for old growth. There was a directive from the Forest Service, from Washington office that stated, we need to be managing for old growth. They created that old growth amendment, which was later rescinded and, done away with. But all folks here in Illinois, especially in the Shawnee region, are dedicated to figuring out like what old growth do we have? What are those conditions that we need to look for as indicators for, mature transitioning to old growth forest, and how do we manage for that? So in this context, timber harvest with old growth, I personally wouldn't look at timber harvest in an old growth context. I would much rather see timber stand improvement work being done just to increase the forest health conditions. So really focusing on increasing the species, the compositional species that are aging out, like black oak and some red oaks that have reached their maturity or end of life. You need to look at, are those tree species regenerating? If they're not, an intervention must be made, in the case and in that case. And then looking at, of course, like I mentioned, white oak. If you have good mature white oaks in your stand, make sure they have room to grow, make sure their canopies have space to expand and continue supporting the vigor of those trees. That's what I would look at in an old growth context. I would not go directly for timber harvest.
Mhm. Good. You have a number of questions, so we're going to keep going. I think Judy asked if you could share a copy of the sheet that you use for collecting data on the ground, and I will be able to. We'll send out an email. So I did capture that question, so that's great, and
Okay.
we'll get back to you on that. Heather asked, "What type of invasive species have you seen in the plots in the Trail of Tears besides FSI, fire, and fire? Have there been any other types of management?"
Um, No, so that's the main thing in Trail of Tears, really is focusing on prescribed fire quite a bit. Of course, it's the one area in the region that has had a selective harvest conducted. And so that's, I guess, somewhat different. But invasive species in that region, I mean, unfortunately, there's some kudzu, there's bittersweet, autumn olive, bush honeysuckle, winter creeper, Japanese stiltgrass. Thankfully, we're not dealing with chaff flower or anything, any really degrading herbaceous invasive species. Um, those would be the big ones.
Okay. And moving on, I think we have time for just maybe one or two. And Ray, during Isabella's presentation too, you can take an opportunity to answer the questions. Jen asked about pesticides resistant to hardwood species.
Pest like like hardwood species developing pesticide resistance, I suppose.
We'll take that one off. You can answer that one. How's that?
With that, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that one.
All right. Well, we can move on just really quickly. Has the Shawnee RC&D done any analysis of the areas of clear cut in the late 80s and 90s on the SNF, the Shawnee National Forest?
We haven't done direct analysis on those sites. I have been to some of them. Personally, whenever I first came on, there's an infamous harvest site called the Fairview Harvest, the church. It's where the great standoff happened in the 90s that put in a timber harvesting injunction on the Shawnee National Forest for approximately 20 years. That Fairview harvest, was able to tour the forest stands with the Forest Service. I also have visited those forest sites with our local environmentalist groups that were involved in, I guess, going against those efforts when they occurred in the 90s. Um, I don't have, you know, much of a value judgment on that, and saying that we're interested in making sure that those stands are set on the right trajectory. Now that those interventions did take place, I will say that, like, clear cutting is not happening here. If it is, it's in pine stands. And I would say it's not a great management tool for our forest anyways. There's other harvesting methods, and clear cutting tends to be one of the most, heavy disturbances on our
Okay.
forest. So
Okay. Maureen asked, the data in the Trail of Tears managed area showed 11 bird species that had a positive reaction, but 8 had negative. That seems like a lot. Is that a desired outcome?
it, I don't know, we wouldn't look at it as a desired outcome necessarily. I think it's giving us good information on, say Trail of Tears as a forest. It's in our Ozark Hills division of the Shawnee. So they're very thick, very productive forests that, they're differing conditions. So whenever we're making these interventions, that those results, we can't take them and say like, okay, well, we did a selective harvest here. We benefited these 11 bird species. Let's go out and let's do this, elsewhere, expecting the same results. So I think it's, maybe not a desired result in itself. It's desired to have that information and to know what bird species were negatively affected and those that were positively affected, so that we can look at interventions in the future with more intention, more nuance, and trying to design more specific prescriptions in these cases. So, the fact that those the bird species that were negatively impacted, I'd have to look back at the data again, but a lot of them were, closed canopy, mature forest nesting birds. And so one could say that the folks that initiated the project, they were probably expecting those results to some extent. So some of it is, confirmation of what we did or what we expected. And there were some new, insights in that as well.
Great. Well, we have a number of other questions, so you'll have a little bit of homework to do. So thank you very, very much. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all of them. We do have time at the end after Isabella's presentation and her Q&A. We can open the mic back up again. But there's lots of opportunities. People are asking, Ray, how can they get involved, right? How can Illinois Audubon, how can other citizen science groups get involved? So this is really hopeful. And this is a great presentation. So thank you very much again. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it. Yay.
Thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is Isabella Freeman. And Isabella, if you could turn on your mic and your video.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
I can see you. Yep. Excellent. Great.
Okay, hello, everyone. My name is Isabella Freeman. I'm a forester for the American Bird Conservancy and am based in Chicago. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the work done at ABC doing oak ecosystem restoration and how that work helps strengthen bird habitat. I'll talk about the post-European settlement era.
Excellent. We can hear you.
In the early 19th century is when Europeans began to settle in the region, which began that decline of oak ecosystems. Unsustainable logging practices began due to the increased use of wood products. Unsustainable hunting practices resulted in the extirpation of bison and elk, as well as predators like wolves, bears, and cougars. Large-scale agriculture and urbanization became commonplace, which destroyed natural areas in favor of row crops and settlements. And to top it off, a lack of forest management began a major shift in forest type, which further degraded these oak ecosystems. Before long, only 27% of original oak ecosystems remained. Which brings us to the modern era. Agriculture, urbanization, and suburban crawl continued to degrade oak ecosystems and increase habitat fragmentation. Fire and other necessary disturbances have been suppressed, impacting oak regeneration and diversity. Invasive species have completely taken over much of the state. Deer populations have increased to unsustainable numbers. and oak ecosystems have begun to shift into mesic ecosystems. As of 2010, about only 17% of the original oak ecosystems remain. I want to quickly point out that the Chicagoland region is located along the Mississippi Flyway, with the shores of Lake Michigan being particularly important for migrant songbirds. For thousands of years, birds have evolved to migrate south for the winter along these flyways, but are now facing less habitat along these crucial flyways, which is resulting in declining populations. I now want to go a little bit deeper into some of these specific causes of decline, starting with the widespread loss of open habitat. Oak ecosystems were historically made up of a matrix of prairie, savanna, woodland, and forests, with prairie, savanna, and woodland all falling under the category of open habitat to varying degrees. Today, less than 0.01% of prairie, 0.02% of savanna, and 17% of oak woodland remains. This map on the right shows the extent of these oak ecosystems at the time of European settlement in the 1830s. As you can see, much of the region consisted of prairie with scattered woodland throughout. Open habitat refers to an ecosystem that features open spaces in the canopy. These spaces allow for more sunlight to reach the forest floor, therefore stimulating vegetation, creating diversity, and contributing to a more structurally complex landscape. Oaks particularly benefit from open canopies because they are somewhat shade intolerant, meaning they have a hard time establishing in closed canopy conditions where less sunlight reaches the floor. So creating openings with more sunlight means more space for oak regeneration. Wildlife also benefits from the diversity and structural variation that is created from having open canopies. It provides ample food resources for birds, openings that are used for foraging, nesting, and for some species of songbirds, these openings act as a stage to carry their songs farther across the landscape. I want to take a moment now to highlight the differences between prairie, savanna, woodland, and forests, and also reiterate how important it is for oak ecosystems to contain a matrix of these landscapes. That mosaic structure is crucial habitat to many bird species, and the diversity that that mosaic creates is a habitat requirement to a lot of birds, and the lack thereof is contributing to the declining bird populations. On the left is a prairie. You can see that there are no trees and a mixture of native grasses and wildflowers. On the right is an oak savanna. The trees are large and spaced out. Open-grown trees are characterized by that large horizontal branching structure that provides unique nesting and foraging opportunities to wildlife. And you can also expect that cover of native grasses, wildflowers, and forbs on the forest floor. On the left is an oak woodland. Notice that there are a lot more trees than in the savanna, and they grow pretty straight, but they're still fairly spaced out. This allows plenty of sunlight to reach the forest floor, which is creating that diverse shrub layer in the understory. And on the right is a typical forest, which has a lot more trees with less space between them and usually more closed canopy conditions, so less light is reaching the floor. Lack of fire and disturbance is another cause of decline. Disturbance is a natural or human-caused event that disrupts forest structure, composition, or function. Examples of disturbance would be fire, wind, insect outbreaks, or logging. Human-caused disturbances like fire and logging have been suppressed for quite some time, which has led to a shift in forest structure and composition. A lot of forest management practices are actually meant to mimic these disturbances, like fire and tree removals. These are done because disturbance is a necessary process to maintain oak ecosystems, so their suppression has contributed to the degradation of some of these natural areas. One of the ways oak ecosystem structure and composition has shifted is known as mesification. Mesification is the process where fire-adapted plants are replaced by shade-tolerant or mesophytic species due to environmental changes such as fire exclusion, which results in the degradation of oak habitat. The photo on the left shows an oak woodland. Notice the diverse vegetation layer in the understory compared to the photo on the right. Also notice how on the right there is little to no light coming through the canopy. This allows for shade-tolerant or mesophytic species like sugar maple to establish and eventually take over the landscape, causing the fire-adapted or shade-intolerant species like oaks to have to compete for resources. This chart is a good visual representation of how fire suppression leads to mesification. Once fire is suppressed, mesophytic species begin to establish in the understory, and as time goes on, they take over. This can lead to overstock conditions and a cooler, more humid microclimate. Another cause for decline is the expansion of urban environments, agriculture, and suburban sprawl, collectively known as urbanization. This tends to cause any remnant natural areas to be small and fragmented. These small parcels are usually privately owned and usually not protected. Managing for all these small fragmented natural areas that are owned by separate entities is very difficult, but is worth the effort. Because migratory birds rely on large expanses of contiguous habitat along their migratory path, the concept of habitat connectivity is very important when it comes to managing. Increasing habitat connectivity through the creation of buffers and corridors has to be done through collaborative management. It begins with the acquisition of remnant ecosystems and the removal of man-made structures wherever possible to create corridors. This map from the Illinois Oak Ecosystem Recovery Plan shows an example of a potential corridor utilizing already protected ecosystems, remnant ecosystems, and other potential connections along the Des Plaines River. Deer populations have grown to unsustainable levels as habitat loss and degradation has led them to seek refuge in urban landscapes. Of course, coupled with the fact that hunting is not allowed in urban areas. Hunting has also seen a decrease in popularity in recent years. Deer have the tendency to eat anything they can reach, meaning they will eat oak regeneration, which is further degrading the ecosystem. And to put into words how bad deer populations have gotten, there are about 70 deer per square mile in DuPage County, whereas the sustainable estimate is 5 to 15. The introduction of invasive species has also severely degraded oak ecosystems. This photo just shows some of the common species found in Illinois: buckthorn, stiltgrass, phragmites, bush honeysuckle, just to name a couple. Another cause of decline is the negative perceptions on active management. Tree removals being a big one. Logging has been used to acquire wood products for a very long time and is not always done sustainably. These poor, unsustainable logging practices have led many to view tree removals as a way to destroy an ecosystem rather than enhance it. Although poor logging practices still occur, foresters recognize that when done correctly, tree removals are a tool to enhance forest structure, mimic natural disturbance, and alter species composition through either commercial methods like timber harvest or non-commercial methods like forest stand improvement. Many also misunderstand fire. Sorry, one second. When people hear about fire in the forest, they think about Smokey the Bear and devastating wildfires. But what many fail to realize is that most of these devastating wildfires are caused by a century of fire suppression, causing fuels to build up within the duff layer, so that if a fire does start, the fuels will burn far more intensely, leading to a devastating and out of control event. But as I've mentioned, fire is a great tool for managing natural areas. Frequent prescribed burns mean frequent low-intensity fires, which enhance the ecosystem. The picture on the left is of the Caldor fire in California from 2021, and notice how the flames are in the crowns of the trees. Then look at the photo on the right of a prescribed burn. You can clearly see the difference in intensity between devastating wildfires and controlled burns. Not to mention that the ecosystems out west are very different to ours here in Illinois. They have far more intense drought and thousands of acres of beetle-killed pine forests that lead to extreme wildfire events. Negative perceptions on management are often rooted in fear, which is why education and public outreach events are so important in shifting these negative perceptions. So now I want to take a few minutes to talk about why oaks are so important and go into a little bit more detail about how oaks harbor diversity, provide resources to wildlife, and why birds preferentially seek oak. One of the ways oaks harbor diversity is by hosting a wide variety of insects, notably Lepidoptera species like moths, butterflies, and caterpillars. This graph shows how oaks are the leading host tree for Lepidoptera species in comparison to other common tree species like maples. Oaks host around 534 species of moths, butterflies, and caterpillars, whereas maples and box elder host about 255 species, which is just another reason why birds seek oak when selecting habitat. So like I've said, oak ecosystems are ideally made up of a matrix of prairies, oak savannas, oak woodlands, and forests. Prairies and grasslands host a wide variety of native grasses, flowers, and forbs. These attract insects, which in turn attracts birds. There are some common there are a lot of bird species who must utilize a combination of these landscapes. For example, some species may nest in woodlands, but forage in grasslands, and so on. So it is important that we maintain a mosaic of these ecosystems to provide habitat. Oak ecosystems provide a multitude of resources to wildlife as well, like foraging space, food resources, and nesting opportunities. Different species utilize different components of a habitat and different parts of a tree for different reasons. So, for example, some species may forage for insects in the bark of a tree, whereas some may forage on the forest floor. Others utilize prairies and savannas for food. Some nest in the cavities of older oaks or snags, while others nest in the ends of the branches covered by leaves, and so on. So not only do oaks host a lot of insects, but some of the other food resources they provide are buds, acorns, leaves, all of which are very high in nutrients and favored by wildlife. This chart here shows what trees some birds prefer when choosing a nest. Oaks, but white oaks in particular, are a clear favorite when it comes to nesting when compared to species like sugar maple or American beech. I now want to talk about our focal species. The two primary focal species that we manage for are the Cerulean warbler and the red-headed woodpecker, but we also monitor for wood thrush and eastern whippoorwill. These are considered species of greatest conservation need and were selected as our focal species due to their reliance on oak ecosystems for habitat. The red-headed woodpecker is widely distributed across the eastern side of the US and southeastern Canada. The northern populations tend to migrate south in the winter, but it has been observed that some populations stay put. Unfortunately, their populations have declined by about 58% since 1970 due to the widespread loss of open habitat, suppression of fire, and the cutting of dead trees. When it comes to habitat requirements, red-headed woodpeckers prefer a minimum 8 acres in their summer breeding range and about half that in their winter range. They rely on oak woodlands and savannas with tall, spaced trees, preferably mass-producing oaks, for nesting and foraging. The relatively open canopies of woodlands and savannas allows for a bountiful understory layer, which provides cover and food for foraging, and they primarily forage for seeds, fruits, nuts, and insects. The red-headed woodpecker also requires about 8 to 16 snags or dead standing trees per acre. Snags are one of the most important components of their habitat as they use these trees to nest and forage for insects. I have seen firsthand that if you can create open canopy conditions and provide snags especially, they will come. This can be done through invasive species removal, of course, tree removal such as forest stand improvement, thinnings, or crop tree release, and prescribed burns. And if dead trees or snags are not already abundant on a site, they can be created by girdling, which essentially kills a tree and leaves it standing. The next focal species is the Cerulean warbler. These guys spend their summers in central and eastern U.S. forests to breed and migrate south to the eastern slope of the Andes Mountains every winter. Research has shown that their population declines about 3% each year since 1966 due to the destruction and fragmentation of large forest tracts. They require large forested tracts at minimum 50 to 75 acres, but 65% of the population is found in tracts of 1,000 acres or more, which is hard to come by in areas like the Chicagoland due to the suburban sprawl and agriculture. They prefer to live in forested interiors that contain white oak stands with large diameter and tall trees, and thrive in diverse habitats. In forestry, the terms vertical and horizontal heterogeneity are used when describing types of diversity. Vertical heterogeneity is used when describing variations in forest structure from the ground up and is associated with greater biodiversity. Ceruleans like habitats that are complex, like that found in uneven-aged forests, basically trees of varying ages and heights. They prefer tall, mature oaks with large diameters that tower in the overstory for nesting, and the males use them also to perch when calling out their bird songs. They have also been observed to prefer forests with an open understory, enclosed midstory. Horizontal heterogeneity is used when describing variations in forest structure and composition across a landscape, and is also associated with greater biodiversity. Ceruleans like to have forest openings. The males like to perch in the canopy. These openings in the canopy allow their song to carry farther across the landscape, and they also tend to favor forests that have a lower density of trees because they prefer their habitat to have fewer but larger stems. Ceruleans have been observed in a variety of forest types, from upland steep ridges to bottomland riparian areas, and their behaviors are known to vary across these landscapes, which is why managing for their habitat has to be site-dependent. What we do know for sure is that they require large tracts of land, which is why increasing the connectivity of natural areas, especially in their breeding ground and along their migratory path, is so important. Some forestry practices to consider include timber management, with the aim to increase bowl size and the height of overstory stems, maintaining healthy stalking densities in the 65 to 85% stalking range, with a goal of having about 25% mature canopy, managing for uneven-aged forests to increase that vertical heterogeneity, creating gaps in the canopies, and finally, to continue and monitor. I now want to go into a little bit more detail about some of the common management practices done. As I'm sure many of you know, invasive species removals are a tedious but necessary practice. There are a lot of methods to control invasive species. Some of the big ones are forestry mowing and backpack spraying, both of which are featured in these photos. Cut stump treatments, hack and squirt, basil barking, and foliar spraying are some others. Invasive species removal is always the very first step when managing a forest before doing absolutely anything else. The same principle applies for invasive species as it does for desirable vegetation. When you create openings in the canopy, increasing that sunlight, the vegetative population that is there will explode, and we definitely don't want that happening to invasive species. There are several types of tree removals. The most commonly used forms are forest stand improvement, or FSI, and timber harvest. The left two images show examples of FSI, which is a type of non-commercial removal that can be used to reduce stalking, remove less desirable stems, or alter species composition. The top left shows an example of how a forester would walk through the woods and mark certain trees to be removed to either reduce the stalking or alter the species composition. The The bottom left image shows two trees that have been girdled. Girdling is when you cut a ring around the bole of a tree, which severs the cambium and prevents nutrients from being taken up into the tree, which essentially kills the tree and leaves it standing. The upper right shows a diagram of a crop tree release. Crop tree release is technically in the category of forest stand improvement, but it is a little bit different and worth noting. It essentially involves selecting a crop tree or a healthy tree of a desirable species whose growth may be inhibited due to a lack of light or nutrients, usually because they're of nearby stems. The goal is to remove some of those nearby stems on one or more sides of the tree to release it or reallocate resources that will aid in the further growth of that desirable stem. The bottom right shows an example of trees that are marked for a tree harvest. Harvests are an example of a commercial removal and can be a good way to create openings in the canopy that mimic natural disturbances while also acquiring timber products in the process when done correctly. Tree plantings and seedings of native vegetation are two really cool ways to create oak ecosystems. These images show examples of some tree plantings. The left shows stakes placed in rows in a wetland to mark where trees will be planted. The right image shows a tree that was recently planted with a cage put around it to prevent deer browse. Prescribed fire is another important tool, as I've mentioned a couple times. So I just want to reiterate how important of a tool it is for restoring and maintaining oak ecosystems. One of the cool things I get to do at ABC is participate in bird monitoring. In the spring, we take these devices called ARUs, or audio recording units, and we place them at random plot points at a property of our choosing. We choose sites that have had previous forest management done to try and monitor the bird's response to management. The ARU devices are set to record for 1 hour at sunrise and 1 hour at sunset when the birds are active. And at the end of the summer, we collect the devices along with some vegetation and tree data from that plot and send the device off to be analyzed. What I think is one of the most important aspects of forest management is outreach and education. I get to participate in a lot of outreach events like workshops, webinars, and conferences in the hopes of spreading good information about oak ecosystems. Most recently, I was in Ohio, where ABC held 2 workshops to discuss small forest patch management with landowners and other professionals in the industry. Partner building and collaboration is also a super important tool when it comes to building a conservation movement. Collaborating with partners and other professionals in the industry is an important way to learn and share resources. And the work at ABC is possible through our numerous partnerships. And here's a list of some of our awesome partners. And that's all from me. Here are the links to some of ABC's socials and my contact information. So if you have any questions that maybe we won't have time to get to today, please feel free to reach out. And if we do have time, I can answer some questions now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isabella. This was an amazing presentation. We definitely had quite a handful of questions coming in. I know we're supposed to end at 12:15, but we still have quite a few participants still here in the room. So I think we definitely can take 5 to 10 minutes to answer the remaining questions that we have for you. And then I will wrap us up in the end. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Okay. Let me find the first one that was relevant to your presentation. Someone was wondering if you could go back to the urbanization slide that included deer in
Oh,
it.
yeah.
There was no question on that. I think they just wanted to see that again really quick, and then you can go back to your contact and thank you slide.
There you go.
Awesome. Thank you. And you can just leave it up for a little bit. What is the future of oak in the face of disease threats?
So I know that there's a lot of diseases that are starting to become more and more of an issue in parts of the US and in Illinois. It's all about right now continued monitoring, and I know there's a lot of research being done. So That's where kind of that collaborative management comes into play that I mentioned. Collaborating with people who are doing the research. So my company isn't necessarily doing that research right now, but staying informed about that research and knowing what to do to come up with best management practices to prevent the further spread of those diseases is kind of our next move.
Awesome, thank you. And Jen wonders, will fire remove snags and insects?
Um, it shouldn't. With prescribed burns, when done right, you can usually do some prep before doing a prescribed burn. So kind of using like a leaf blower and blowing around the snags that they don't catch on fire when you're doing a prescribed burn. Um, and making sure you're doing the mop up is what it's called when you go around after the prescribed burn and kind of clean up and put out some of the fires that are still going. So there are ways to prevent those things from happening.
Awesome. Heather says, I know of entities with forests that do not like to keep dead standing, even if they pose no threat to people, because they don't like how they look. How can we encourage people to keep dead standing trees for wildlife?
Um, Definitely outreach and education. Um, so webinars like this one, workshops, just spreading good information.
Awesome, perfect. We have a few more, and then I'll look in the chat really quick. Christine asks, what are the natural predators of these birds or birds in general, and have they become increasingly preyed on due to rodent remediation for birds such as hawks and owls?
The biggest threat to a lot of the birds right now is actually cats, outdoor cats. ABC has a huge movement on preventing cats from preying on birds. So whether it being like spaying and neutering cats, outdoor cats, and just kind of spreading information about, not letting your cats outside, that kind of thing.
Awesome, thank you. And another question is, do you fertilize these trees slash shrubs that you mentioned? Do you clear plants away from the base of those trees slash shrubs, or do you let plants grow up on the trunk of the tree?
Um, Trying to find that question because
Oh yeah, it was in the chat, not in the
oh,
Q&A by Mary Roth
okay.
at about
I see.
12:12.
So I have never done the fertilization of trees and shrubs. I'm not sure if that is a practice that we do through our RCPP. I'd have to do a little more research on that. But when it comes to clearing plants around the base of a tree, yeah, especially if it's like a newly planted tree, you kind of want to keep the weeds away from it, give it a good opportunity to grow. And when it comes to larger trees, it depends on the plants that are growing around the base of it.
Perfect. And let me see, I think there might have been one more question. Someone asked, what is stalking?
Stalking refers to basically the density of a forest. So how many trees are present in a stand? So in a given space. So higher stocking would be like a higher density of trees, essentially.
Okay. And we have one more question that I can see. Someone asked, can't buckthorn be used for timber or other products?
Um, I'm sure it can, but it's definitely the benefits do not outweigh the cost at all with that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, those were all the questions that I saw. I'm going to share my screen now and wrap everything. Oh, sorry, not my whole screen. I'm going to share some of my screen now, hopefully, and just wrap everything up for us. I want to say thank you again to Ray and Isabella for their amazing presentations. We had a really great turnout today, and I hope you all found it as informative as I did. We will send out an email after this to everyone who attended with a link to this recording. Once we receive it, it'll go onto our YouTube site, and I will also send out an email that include their emails so that you can ask them any follow-up questions that you might have. On top of that, there are a few QR codes here. If you're interested in joining IFA, please do so. We do have a free option now. Friends of IFA is what it's called, and this allows you to receive our quarterly newsletters and any invitations to upcoming events like the other webinars that we plan on hosting this coming year. The next one might be about bats. So if you're interested, definitely scan that QR code and sign up for the Friends of IFA list. You can also become a member on top of that, and that gives you some extra perks. On top of that, check out our website, Clearinghouse, for a lot of information. Definitely go there. So much stuff. If you have any questions, you'll probably find an answer there. And then lastly, we were able to certify this course for one Category 1 SAF CFE. So if you are interested in receiving a CFE, please scan the QR code and fill out just a few questions that I need to be able to send that off to everybody. That link will also be in a follow-up email as well. And thank you,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you, Kinsey, and thank you to Ray and Isabella. It was a phenomenal presentation. There are a number of questions as to whether or not they can get a link to the website and to the guidebooks. And so we have been sharing it, but just so that you all know, we will send that out in an email when the link goes for the recording. And we'll share out some other resources that were asked of our panelists. So again, thank you, Kinsey, for your organization, and to Ray and Isabella, really wonderful presentation for all. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday season, everybody, and check out IFA's website for the next webinar. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Thanks, Isabella. Goodbye, all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good